Let's bring you up to date with the latest from the campaign trail, and understandably the focus has been on preventing future terrorist attacks after the grim events of Saturday night. Jeremy Corbyn's been campaigning in the northeast, saying he'd back calls for the Prime Minister to stand down, that she was responsible as Home Secretary for cuts in police numbers. But he clarified his comments in an interview with our Alex Forsyth.
I'm not backing away from anything. What I'm saying is an election on now is a choice before everybody. I'm articulating what is a deep anger amongst those people that have seen 20,000 police officers lose their jobs, seen firefighters lose their jobs, seeing ambulance crews unable to cope with the services they're under. I think as she as Home Secretary needs to think about what she did while she was Home Secretary.
So she shouldn't resign? I just want to be clear.
Let's be very clear. There is an election on. Everybody has a choice, and a lot of people are very angry and would have wanted her to resign were she still Home Secretary. The choice is going to be made on Thursday by the people of this country.
But Theresa May in Edinburgh, with the Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson, defended her record and hit back at Mr Corbyn.
We have been protecting counter-terrorism policing. We've provided funding for an uplift in armed policing. We have, from 2015, we're protecting police budgets. As I said, the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn's front bench, said that police budgets could be cut by up to 10%. We said, no, we're going to protect those budgets. But it's also about the powers that you give to the police. And I have been responsible through a number of pieces of legislation I've introduced to give extra powers to the police to deal with terrorism. Jeremy Corbyn's boasted that he's opposed every single piece of anti-terror legislation since he came into Parliament.
But it wasn't just Labour and Mrs May that Mrs May had to fend off. The Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron, took time off preparing breakfast in a cafe to take aim at the Prime Minister with his own stinging attack.
This is a point where we look about how do we keep our country, our people safe. And as things stand, we have a Prime Minister who told off the police for saying that they were crying wolf. And that was at the moment, at the time, when she was responsible for making cuts in our police numbers in every part of our country. And today she stands and says that enough is enough. Well, enough was enough the first time this happened. This is the moment where we stand behind our police and our security services and do the one thing we know will make us safer: invest in our police.
And Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has weighed in over police numbers in England.
Theresa May has to outline what she thinks it means. You know, nobody can escape the fact that Theresa May has been Home Secretary for the past number of years before she was Prime Minister. She presided over significant cuts in policing in England, and you know, there is a lot of concern about that. Now, you know, security is one of the most important priorities for any government in Scotland. While we're not immune at all from these threats, we've invested to maintain police numbers, and we've seen over recent times an increase in the numbers of trained armed police officers we've got.
While the UKIP leader Paul Nuttall says the issue of police numbers was one of many Mrs May misjudged.
Well, I think she's got it wrong over the police cuts. I also think she's got it wrong over border guard cuts as well, and indeed cuts to the prison service. I'm not sure that these comments have much legitimacy coming from someone like Jeremy Corbyn, someone who's called Hamas and Hezbollah as friends. I mean, to attack Theresa May on the issue of terrorism, and it really is a weak point for Jeremy Corbyn.
Katy and Owen are with us. Katy, it's been a fascinating debate actually today on this whole security issue after the terrible events of the weekend, because we've got two leaders who have taken two different aspects of the debate: policing numbers and the powers of the police. And both leaders are running away from their past and their comments and their policies in relation to those two issues.
Yeah, and I don't think the Conservatives ever imagined that they would be on the defensive on security when this campaign started. But by focusing on police numbers and police cuts, Labour have put Theresa May on the back foot today, and she's really having to explain why she made those decisions and actually what the link might be between, you know, police numbers and the recent terror attacks we've had.
And the powers of the police, Owen, and the comments that Jeremy Corbyn has made in the past. He's been having to sort of explain those.
What do you mean by that? What comments?
Well, comments in saying that he is proud of the fact that he has voted down anti-terror legislation.
Theresa May voted against that anti-terror legislation as well. Look, I think what many people conclude is that Theresa May has shown throughout this campaign that she's a threat to national security. And the two reasons for that are that she has been Home Secretary for 6 of the last 7 years in this country. And in that period, 20,000 police officers have lost their jobs. There's been a reduction net overall of police numbers. That she accused the police in 2015, not that long ago, of crying wolf and of scaremongering because of what they said would be the impact of those police cuts. So that's one aspect which she has to be held to account for. The other is her alliance, and she tried to be ever closer to a Saudi dictatorship, which is at the absolute epicentre of the exporting of international extremism, which is a threat to national security and the security of every single person watching this programme.
I asked you about Jeremy Corbyn. I asked you about Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn. Katy's
But Jeremy Corbyn is... No. Come on. Can I be honest here, Clive? We've got the entire British press at the moment almost ranged against the opposition leader. I'm trying to redress the balance here. In terms of Jeremy Corbyn's record is twofold. One, opposing the cuts to police numbers, which the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is directly responsible for. She is responsible for reducing police numbers. Jeremy Corbyn opposed those cuts. The second point, on the Saudi dictatorship, which chops the heads off people for being gay, which chops the heads off people for being dissidents, which treats women in the most abominable way possible, and is literally exporting an ideology, in this country, as well as other countries, which is a threat to national security.
Owen,
Jeremy Corbyn has consistently opposed that.
I want to hear Katy. Thank you very much. Katy, say something.
On police numbers, I think there are two things here, because there's the question of do we have enough police on the streets in the UK, and there's also the question of would more police stop the recent terror attacks. And if you look at the one on Saturday, it was within 8 minutes the armed police were there since the first call. And I don't know if more police really would have made that quicker, but obviously...
But the bottom line for voters is that police numbers fell after 2010. So, I mean, that is a difficult conundrum for her, isn't it?
Definitely, but I think what the Conservatives need to do and what they should be doing is talking about whether that is an issue in itself, but also does that issue can relate to these terror attacks? Because we had today Lord Carlisle, who's been very involved in terror legislation, and he said it's a separate conversation than looking at to whether it could have stopped the recent terror attacks.
Hold on, we had the army on our streets. And the reason we had the army on our streets is because the police did not have the resources to police the streets of this country in the aftermath of that horrendous bombing in Manchester. The truth is the police are asking and have asked over and over again for more resources. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, and she has to be very careful about not intervening in a general election, she was on radio this morning saying that they did need more resources. Resources have been slashed, have been cut by Theresa May, the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister of this country. And it's not just police we're talking about about armed police. Armed police have been reduced by about 1,000 in the last few years. Now, this morning, a government minister went through a series of excruciating interviews because she refused to accept or admit or just answer the fact that in the last few years, those armed police numbers have been slashed. And the reality is, as I've said, people do have to ask themselves a question. If the Prime Minister has systematically slashed police numbers and armed police numbers and is kowtowing to a Saudi dictatorship which is exporting international extremism in this country and other countries, is she a threat herself to national security? And the reason I ask that is because today, Steve Hilton, the former head of strategy for David Cameron, a Conservative advisor, demanded her resignation because of that. And I have to say, all of us have to take that on board. He's not a lefty.
Okay, Katy, briefly.
Steve Hilton, I mean, I don't know, it's not that dramatic that he's done this. He's made a habit recently of going for his former colleagues. We saw him turn on David Cameron in the campaign.
Indeed. All right, okay, we're going to rejoin you guys in a couple of minutes. Now, you may have been somewhat bemused by the opinion polls this weekend. A whole flurry came out. Opinium, ICM, YouGov. They were all at it, predicting leads for the Conservatives of anything from 1 to 12%. Confused? You might well be. Well, Ellie's off today, so Adam Fleming stepped into the breach and, grabbing her balls, headed off to London's South Bank to investigate what people make of the differing polls.
Meet the mighty mood box, used on our sister programme Daily Politics to find out what people really think. I'm taking it to London's South Bank Centre to ask people's views about being asked their views.
And here's the question we're asking the great British public today. Opinion polls, are they science or fiction?
on the day they never seem to come out as planned previously. So I think it's an element of fiction to it.
Everyone's talking about the polls.
I have no idea.
Okay, put it back in then. Very honest,
Sorry.
very honest.
It isn't an exact science, is it? Because what people say about what they're going to do isn't necessarily what they're going to do.
Here's someone who juggles data for a living, pollster Joe Twyman of YouGov.
What do you think about this as a opinion gathering method?
Well, as my idol Peter Snow would say, it's just a bit of fun. When you're looking to do an accurate scientific poll, you hope to accurately represent the population that you're trying to survey in the sample that takes part in that survey. And so, for instance, you need the right number of old people, the right number of young people, the right number of men, women, etc., etc.
After the last election, the professionals realised they didn't have the right number of Tory supporters and had spoken to too many Labour voters.
I think some people don't always say what they think. That's the problem, particularly Tory voters.
Oh, the whole shy Tory thing.
Yeah, shy Tory.
People don't want to admit it.
Yeah, I agree.
Are you a shy Tory?
Medium to shy.
They haven't got it right recently.
Okay, thank you very much.
People lie.
People lie.
Maybe I was lying there.
Oh no!
And why are different polling companies coming up with such different results? Here's a theory.
Usually you could come up with 4 or 5 reasons why pollsters are coming up with different numbers, but on this occasion there's something quite straightforward going on, and it's whether or not you believe that young people and people who didn't turn out in the last general election in 2015, who now say that they're going to, whether they actually do. If you believe them, then it's a closer race. You know, those pollsters who are saying it's a 3-4 point lead are more likely to be right. If, like me and at ICM, you tend to be suspicious of people saying that they're going to change behaviours which are fairly embedded in historical precedent, then you should believe the likes of me, and I'm saying currently it's a 12-point or so lead for the Tories.
Guys, we're doing a little survey about opinion polls.
In other words, are we all asking too many youngsters and people who won't vote at all?
You're too little, I'm afraid. It's grown-ups. Do you pick up the newspaper every day going, oh, I wonder what the polls are saying today?
No, I'm pretty sure what the polls are going to say.
Which is?
So Theresa May is still ahead, but Labour's squeezing in there.
YouGov has suggested that would result in a hung parliament. But did they really?
Based on the current polling, we produced a broad range of possible outcomes. Anything at the time, it was anything from 274 to 345 seats the Conservative might get. Now you need 326 for a majority, so at that time it was possible that a hung parliament could occur if there was an election that day.
The headline was, YouGov predicts hung parliament. That was just one potential outcome.
What you often see during election campaigns is that the interpretation of the polls, whether it's by broadcasters or the media or indeed social media, is somewhat different from the interpretation of the polls that we put out.
After 3 sweltering hours of doing this,
who's got some opinions they'd like to share with me?
Maybe the politicians have a point. The polls are fascinating snapshots, but it's the one on June the 8th that's most accurate.
Well, there we go. A big majority of people here on the South Bank think the opinion polls are more fiction than science. And here ends possibly the dodgiest opinion poll in British electoral history.
Yeah, I'm with Adam on that one. That was very dodgy indeed. Katy, most people think it's fiction rather than science. The fact of the matter is we all follow them, don't we?
Yeah, we promise every year, every election, every referendum, never to listen to the polls because we follow them and then they turn out to be completely wrong. But still, like, an exciting poll comes in and we spend a day talking about it, writing about it. But I think if you do look at the polls so far, you can see that although they all have different figures, they all seem to agree on the fact that the Tories started off with a very big lead and Labour have been making up ground.
Yeah, I mean, that is incontrovertible, Owen, isn't it? And that has given succor to the Labour campaign and given them a certain amount of lift-off. But, I mean, how much do you believe in these polls? Because they are all over the place.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a poll sceptic, I suppose. I mean, to be fair, on Brexit, they weren't actually that off. I thought we were going to leave because of the polling. On Trump, they got them, you know, Hillary Clinton won a big majority, actually, of the popular vote. What I'd say, though, is I think the problem with Theresa May is a lot of people have basically found her out. The more we've seen her, the less people have liked her. I think the reason for that is firstly, she has a record of being inconsistent and dishonest. She said there'd be no early election over and over again.
Owen, we're talking about the polls.
We are, no, but we're talking about
polls, man.
We're talking about why the polling is narrowed. What's the point about having a little chin-strokey chat about polling numbers?
I'm going to sit here. I'm going to stroke my chin now. I want to talk about polls.
I'm just going to keep on going with why the polls have narrowed. And the reason the polls have narrowed is that I think, firstly, because she has a record of saying things which she then goes back on. Early election, not increasing national insurance. She then tried to go back on what she went back on in the first place. Immigration targets, she said it would be reduced to tens of thousands, hasn't come close. Whether it be she was a Brexiteer, a Remainer who reinvented herself as a hardcore Brexiteer, and of course the dementia tax when she tried to impose a 100% inheritance tax of above 100,000 for people with conditions like dementia. So the point is, I think the problem with, in terms of why the polling is narrowed, and it is still not clear from the polls about how much it's narrowed, I still would think the odds are stacked against Labour, but the reason they have narrowed is a lot of people look at Theresa May based on what she said and they don't trust it.
Okay, Katy, Owen really wants to talk about the Conservatives. So you can talk about Labour, okay? So tell me why you think Labour have done so well to narrow those polls down. What is it they've done?
Well, I think first, I think it's two things. One, they started off on such a low bar, well, Jeremy Corbyn did, that lots of people were very surprised when he seemed very likeable in lots of his media appearances. And secondly, I think local say manifestos don't matter. Labour's manifesto had lots of very popular policies in it, whereas the Conservative manifesto seemed to be built on the assumption that they didn't really need to bother because Jeremy Corbyn. It was almost like we don't need to try and woo voters, and we don't need to give them a reason to vote for us. I feel like for lots of people, if you ask them why they should vote Conservative, it would be like a negative reason, like because you don't want Jeremy Corbyn. And I don't think that's a very successful campaign message.
Which is an interesting point, because I think a lot of the time the sorts of policies Labour have put forward have been vilified by much of the press, many politicians. But the reality is, as we've seen in terms of the polling, it bears it out, that most people do think that the more well-off should pay more tax, that we should use that to invest in public services. Most people do believe that certain utilities like rail, water, energy should be not run by foreign governments and private companies, but by the government that they vote in. And that most people, or millions of people, think on things like, should we saddle young people with debt for going to university? So, you know, the reason I say that is we don't know how the election will pan out, and the odds are still against Labour. But I would say to people, as without getting a tiny little violin out, as someone who's been a bit of a lonely voice in the media for a long term on those policies, that millions of people do support those policies, and they have got traction because of the fact that people do like them, but they haven't got the airing until now. They suddenly got airing, they suddenly got box office reception, and all of a sudden people went, do you know what, I quite like these ideas.
Yeah, so Katy. You can understand why in a poll people would say they like what Labour are offering, but I think one of the things is they always say in polls that the Labour vote is overestimated.
Which is true.
Yeah, and I think that's partly the credibility issue, isn't it? So it's like you might like them, but ultimately it's whether voters, when they get into that ballot box, really believe that they can actually vote for Labour and have all these things delivered.
It's not just, it's turnout. It's turnout. I mean, the problem Labour have, which they have to focus on, is getting people who say they're going to vote Labour to vote Labour.
Right. I'm going to end it now. Owen, Katy, it's been good having you in.